Forget everything you think you know about Russia. Beyond the headlines, beyond the politics, the military parades, the freezing winter footage that dominates the news, is a country stretching across 11 time zones, filled with ancient cities, breathtaking landscapes, and millions of ordinary people living lives that look nothing like the stereotypes you've probably absorbed without even realizing it. This is a country where mosques and Orthodox cathedrals share the same skyline, where a lake holds 20% of the entire planet's unfrozen fresh water, where you can board a train in a European-feeling capital and step off the same train, days later, somewhere that feels closer to the edge of the world than anywhere else on Earth. So what is daily life actually like here? Why do so many foreigners who visit end up genuinely surprised by what they find? Is Siberia really as unlivable as people imagine? Are Russian cities actually modern? And why does Russia feel so culturally distinct from the rest of Europe, despite sharing so much history with it? Let's actually go look. Russia isn't just a country, it's almost a continent. At roughly 17 million square kilometers, Russia is the largest country on Earth by a staggering margin, nearly twice the size of the next largest country, Canada. It spans 11 time zones, which means that when the sun is rising over the Pacific coast in Vladivostok, people in the western city of Kaliningrad are still in the middle of the previous night. Geographically, Russia sits across two continents simultaneously. The Ural Mountains form a loose dividing line. West of them is what's typically considered European Russia, home to Moscow, St. Petersburg, and the bulk of the population. East of them stretches Siberia and the Russian Far East, an enormous expanse of forest, tundra, and mountain that most of the world has only ever seen in brief news clips about extreme cold. That geographic scale produces climate diversity that's hard to overstate. The Black Sea coast near Sochi has a genuinely subtropical climate, palm trees, beaches, ski resorts within an hour's drive of the coastline. Meanwhile, the Siberian city of Yakutsk regularly registers as one of the coldest permanently inhabited places on the planet, with winter temperatures that can plunge below -50°C. You could board a train in Moscow and travel for 6 straight days without leaving the country. And that's exactly what the legendary Trans-Siberian Railway offers, connecting the European capital all the way to Vladivostok on the Pacific coast. A journey of more than 9,000 kilometers. And that's only the beginning of what makes this country so difficult to summarize in a single image. Most people, when they picture a Russian city, imagine the same thing. Gray Soviet-era apartment blocks, concrete, a kind of flat utilitarian sameness. That image is decades out of date, and it was never the full picture even when it was accurate. Moscow's skyline today includes the Moscow International Business Center, a cluster of glass skyscrapers that look more like a financial district in a global hub than anything associated with the Soviet aesthetic. The Moscow Metro remains one of the most architecturally stunning subway systems on Earth. Stations built like underground palaces, with chandeliers, mosaics, and marble that long predate any modern renovation trend. It's also remarkably efficient, frequent, extensive, and inexpensive by international standards. St. Petersburg offers an entirely different character, often described as Russia's most European city, with canals, pastel-colored imperial architecture, and the Hermitage Museum, one of the largest and most significant art museums anywhere in the world, housed inside the former winter palace of the Tsars. Kazan tells a completely different story again, sometimes called the Istanbul of the Volga. It's a genuine fusion of cultures, minarets rising between Orthodox cathedrals, the call to prayer blending with church bells, all centered around the UNESCO-listed Kazan Kremlin. In 2026, Kazan is serving as the cultural capital of the Islamic world, hosting exhibitions and cultural forums throughout the year. A designation that surprises people who've never associated Russia with a significant Muslim cultural heritage, despite the country being home to millions of Muslim citizens, primarily from Tatar and Caucasian backgrounds. Sochi, on the Black Sea coast, became a global name after hosting the 2014 Winter Olympics, and the infrastructure built for those games turned it into a genuine resort destination, offering skiing in the nearby Caucasus Mountains and beach tourism on the coast, sometimes in the same week. And then there's Vladivostok, founded in the 19th century, perched on the Pacific coast near the borders of China and North Korea, surrounded by mountains and water, connected by dramatic cable-stayed bridges, and serving as the eastern terminus of the Trans-Siberian Railway. It feels less like the Russia of Western imagination and more like a Pacific port city with a completely distinct identity. But the biggest surprise for most visitors isn't found in any city at all. Few countries on Earth have landscapes that range this dramatically, and most of them remain almost entirely unknown outside Russia itself. Lake Baikal, in southern Siberia, is the oldest and deepest lake on the planet, formed roughly 25 million years ago, plunging more than 1,600 meters at its deepest point. It's so vast and so clear that it holds approximately 1/5 of all the unfrozen fresh water on Earth. In winter, the surface freezes into transparent ice formations that look almost unreal in photographs, and yet are completely real, drawing visitors from around the world specifically to walk and photograph the frozen surface. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, sacred to the indigenous Buryat people who have lived along its shores for generations. The Altai Mountains, in southern Siberia, near the borders of Mongolia, Kazakhstan, and China, offer some of the most dramatic and least visited alpine scenery on the continent. Turquoise rivers, ancient burial mounds, and a sense of remoteness that's increasingly rare anywhere in the world. Kamchatka, a peninsula in Russia's far east, is home to dozens of active volcanoes, geysers, and some of the highest densities of brown bears on the planet. It feels, in footage and in person, almost prehistoric. Landscapes that look like they belong in a different geological era entirely. The Arctic tundra stretches across Russia's northern edge, home to indigenous communities who have adapted to some of the harshest sustained conditions on the planet and offering some of the most reliable northern lights viewing anywhere on Earth during winter months. And underlying nearly all of this is forest, an almost incomprehensible amount of it. Russia contains roughly 1/5 of the entire world's forest cover, the largest share of any single country on the planet. The Siberian taiga alone represents one of the largest continuous forest ecosystems that still exists anywhere on Earth. But nature isn't actually what surprises most foreign visitors the most. That distinction belongs to something far more personal. People often expect Russians to be cold, distant, even unfriendly, an assumption shaped almost entirely by Cold War-era stereotypes and the stern expressions you tend to see in news footage of officials. The reality that most visitors describe is almost the opposite, once you understand the cultural context. Russian hospitality, especially within homes and among friends, is famously generous. Guests are frequently offered more food than anyone could reasonably eat, and refusing a host's hospitality is often considered mildly insulting rather than polite restraint. Family remains a central organizing structure in Russian life, often spanning 3 generations under one roof or within close proximity, with grandparents playing an active, hands-on role in raising grandchildren, a pattern that's become less common in much of Western Europe and North America, but remains deeply normal across Russia. Russian cuisine carries far more depth than the borscht and vodka stereotype suggests. Dishes vary enormously by region. Siberian pelmeni, Caucasus-influenced grilled meats, Tatar pastries in Kazan, fresh Pacific seafood in Vladivostok. Food culture is deeply tied to seasonal traditions, religious calendars, and regional identity in ways that mirror culinary diversity you'd find across an entire continent rather than a single nation. Russians do tend to present a more reserved, even stern exterior to strangers in public spaces, something foreign visitors notice immediately, particularly on public transport or in everyday commercial interactions. But that reserve dissolves rapidly once any kind of personal connection is established. The general cultural pattern is something like cautious with strangers, intensely warm with anyone considered a friend. This reserved then warm pattern completely reshapes how foreign visitors experience the country once they spend any real time there. The Russia of brief encounters and the Russia of actual friendships are, by most accounts, almost 2 different countries. One particular stereotype follows Russia everywhere it's discussed online. the persistent cultural fascination with Russian beauty standards, and the broader association of Russian women with conventional attractiveness. This perception didn't appear from nothing. Russia has a long, well-documented tradition in beauty pageants and modeling, producing a disproportionate number of internationally recognized models and pageant winners relative to its population over the past several decades. Fashion culture in major Russian cities tends to place significant social value on personal presentation, visible in everyday street style in Moscow and St. Petersburg, where dressing well for routine outings is far more culturally normalized than in many Western cities, where casual dress has become the default. Self-care and grooming culture is similarly significant. Skincare routines, in particular, have deep cultural roots in Russia, partly shaped by the practical necessity of protecting skin against genuinely harsh winter climates across much of the country. It's worth being careful and balanced here, because this particular stereotype can easily slide into reductive territory that says very little about Russia as a place and a culture. The more interesting and more accurate observation isn't really about appearance at all. It's about how seriously Russian culture, across genders, treats personal presentation and social ritual as part of daily life, in ways that differ noticeably from the more casual social norms common in much of North America. But what genuinely surprises most foreign visitors to Russia has almost nothing to do with appearance, and almost everything to do with how functional and normal everyday life actually looks once you're there. Living in Russia isn't what most people, shaped by news headlines, actually imagine. Public transport in major Russian cities is frequent, extensive, and notably inexpensive by global standards. The Moscow metro alone moves millions of passengers daily through a system that's both architecturally remarkable and genuinely punctual. Trains arriving every couple of minutes during peak hours, a level of reliability that puts many Western transit systems to shame. Education in Russia maintains a strong historical emphasis on mathematics, science, and the arts, with literacy rates among the highest in the world and a continued cultural reverence for literature, classical music, and ballet that shows up in everyday life, not just in tourist-facing performances, but in how ordinary families spend their time and raise their children. Shopping malls, cafes, and modern retail exist throughout Russian cities in forms that would look familiar to almost any visitor from a major Western city, though the specific brands have shifted in recent years. Many international chains that once operated under Western names have either departed or been rebranded under Russian ownership, often keeping similar menus and color schemes under new local branding. Cafes and restaurants remain consistently busy, and domestic tourism within Russia has actually grown in recent years, as more Russians explore destinations within their own enormous country rather than traveling abroad. Technology access remains widespread, though internet use involves some specific local adaptations. Certain Western platforms require workarounds to access, and digital payment systems have shifted toward Russian-developed alternatives like the Mir payment card system, following changes to how international financial networks operate within the country. The seasons themselves shape daily rhythm dramatically, depending on where in this enormous country you live. Winters in much of European Russia bring genuinely short daylight hours and serious cold, met with an entire cultural ecosystem built around it. Warm clothing traditions, winter festivals, ice skating in public parks, and a normalized relationship with weather conditions that would shut down cities elsewhere in the world. The contrast between the media image, protests, politics, sanctions, conflict, and the lived reality for most ordinary Russians going about daily routines is significant. Both things are simultaneously true. Serious geopolitical realities exist, and ordinary daily life continues in parallel, largely unaffected on a moment-to-moment basis for people not directly connected to those larger events. Maybe Russia's biggest mystery, for most outside observers, isn't actually political at all. It's simply scale, and the sheer diversity that scale produces. A country this enormous cannot be reduced to a single image, a single city, or a single news cycle. And yet that's almost exactly how it tends to get represented to international audiences. The country is enormous, genuinely difficult to comprehend in scale, until you look at how many distinct climate zones, cultures, and landscapes it contains within a single set of borders. It's diverse: Orthodox Christian, Muslim Tatar, Siberian indigenous, Pacific maritime, Caucasus mountain culture, all coexisting under one national identity in ways that rarely make it into international coverage. And as a direct result of both of those things, it's profoundly misunderstood by people who've never had reason to look past the headlines. A nation this large cannot be understood through headlines alone. No country this size, with this much internal variation, ever really can be. Russia is a country of contrasts, ancient traditions sitting alongside genuinely modern cities. Harsh, unforgiving winters paired with some of the most striking natural beauty found anywhere on the planet. Global headlines dominated by geopolitics, existing in parallel with millions of ordinary people simply living their everyday lives, going to work, raising families, meeting friends at cafes, exactly as people do everywhere else on Earth. Whether you admire this country or criticize it, and there are entirely legitimate reasons people land on very different sides of that question, one thing is difficult to honestly deny: there is far more to Russia than most of the world ever actually gets to see. If you had the chance, would you visit Russia? And if you've already been, what surprised you most about the country? Drop it in the comments. I'd genuinely like to know what didn't match the image you walked in with.